Stop me if you've heard this one. Richard the Lionheart, a warrior king of England, a shining beacon of chivalry, honor, and faith, a man of legendary stature who wrestled with Saladin and came out a legend. Noble, beloved, the perfect medieval king. Well, guess what? You've been lied to. Hard. Richard wasn't England's greatest king. He wasn't even a good one. Out of his 10-year reign, he spent maybe 6 months in the country only to tax it. Now, don't get me wrong, put Richard on a battlefield and he's a monster. A natural-born commander who could outfight just about anyone. The guy could win battles, but keeping a kingdom stable, oh boy, he flunked that class hard. So, let's rewind. England in Richard's time didn't quite look the way it does now. In fact, thanks to some classic feudalism, the guy was basically more French than English. When his father Henry II kicked the bucket in 1189, Richard inherited a kingdom where the crown's heartland wasn't London. It was half of France. This patchwork monster of territories is what in the history bees we call the Angevin Empire. England, Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine, Brittany, and bits of Wales and Ireland. Naturally, this made the French king, Philip II, hell-bent on tearing the whole thing apart. If he could claw back his ancestral lands, the entire empire would unravel. So, what does this mean for England? Well, Richard had more wine cellars in France than villages in England, and he treated the crown's English side less like a kingdom and more like his personal ATM. And trust me, we're about to see just how expensive his little hobbies got. Let's start with his coronation. Day one of Richard's reign, and he already manages to spark a riot. He banned Jews from attending his coronation feast, not exactly winning most tolerant king of the year. And when some showed up anyway with gifts, the crowd went berserk. What followed was a massacre of London's Jewish community. I mean, yeah, it was the Middle Ages, but still not the best first impression. Now from this point, I'd like to divide Richard's reign and this video into 3 parts, starting with the Third Crusade. Richard wasn't interested in sticking around to actually govern. He had bigger dreams. Saladin had just captured Jerusalem, yeah, the whole Kingdom of Heaven thing, and Europe was in a frenzy to take it back. Richard so ran off to renounce his past wickedness, raise a fresh army, and then taxed England like a king possessed. Nobody was safe, not even the clergy. Chronicler Ralph of Coggeshall summed it up bluntly. Richard was one of the immense cohort of sinners. To raise even more cash, he sold official positions, lands, and privileges to anyone with a fat purse. Even King William I of Scotland, who had sworn loyalty to Henry II, got released from his oath for a mere 10,000 marks. Because Richard needed the money. But before the crusade, Richard married Berengaria. The two spent so little time together that historians still debate whether Richard was disinterested in heirs, women, or both. Either way, it wasn't exactly a power couple. Eventually, Richard teamed up with Philip II of France and Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor, for the crusade. But Barbarossa drowned on the way there, so oops. Now, let's just say the Christians weren't doing well in the Holy Land. King Guy of Lusignan was ruling by virtue of his marriage to Isabella of Jerusalem, but he had already fumbled the ball by losing the entire kingdom to Saladin. The only decent stronghold left was Tyre, an impenetrable fortress still in Christian hands thanks to one man's sheer competence, Conrad of Montferrat. Muslim chronicles called him a devil incarnate in his ability to govern and defend the town, and a man of extraordinary courage. So when King Guy tried to stroll into Tyre after losing the entire kingdom, Conrad slammed the gates in his face. By the time Richard and Philip finally showed up, the Crusader camp was already one big soap opera. But everyone agreed to shelve the drama just long enough to besiege the coastal city of Acre in 1189. That siege dragged on for 2 brutal years. Disease ripped through the camps, killing thousands, including Guy's wife and daughters, which pretty much obliterated his already shaky claims to Jerusalem. Even Philip II caught the plague, and the second Acre fell, he picked a fight with Richard, packed his bags, and sailed home. So now it was Richard, stuck in the middle. On one side, Conrad and Guy clawing at each other for the throne of Jerusalem, and on the other, the armies of Saladin. Not exactly the dream vacation. After capturing Acre, Richard was so desperate that he had to break his word to Saladin and ordered his men to execute the city's garrison of about 3,000 Muslims. But credit where credit's due, Richard could fight. Despite being outnumbered, he defeated Saladin at Arsuf and again at Jaffa. But here's the catch. For all his flashy victories, Richard never retook Jerusalem, and all that blood ended in a stalemate. The Crusaders held on to a handful of coastal cities like Acre, and Richard struck a deal with Saladin that unarmed Christians could visit Jerusalem, which was great for tourism but not exactly the epic reconquest everyone had in mind. And while Richard was busy playing Crusader hero, his kingdom back home was on autopilot. England was left in the hands of officials like William Longchamp, who was about as popular as a tax collector at a funeral. With the crusade done, we get to the second part of Richard's reign, the imprisonment. In a dramatic twist, when Richard tried to sail home, he got captured by Duke Leopold of Austria, no less a guy Richard had humiliated earlier by tossing his banner off the walls of Acre during the Crusade. Medieval karma right there. Leopold handed Richard to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV, who demanded 150,000 marks for his release, roughly 3 times England's annual revenue. People were literally melting down church chalices to buy their king out of jail. Meanwhile, Philip II of France had joined forces with Richard's younger brother, John. Yes, that John. The two even offered the emperor 80,000 marks to keep Richard locked up, but he turned down the offer. And upon Richard's release in 1194, Philip allegedly told John, "Look to yourself, the devil is loose." Now, the final part of Richard's reign, the Lionheart against Philip. So John rebelled against Richard. The uprising was quickly crushed though, and the Lionheart dismissed his brother as a child who had evil counselors, despite John being a full 27 years old. But fighting with Philip continued across France. Richard even built a flashy new fortress, Chateau Galliard, overlooking the Seine, because apparently being king of England meant spending most of your time fortifying France. Feudalism was rough, man. If you were an English peasant, your taxes weren't buying better roads, they were buying Richard's new catapults in France. But to be fair, you can't deny his military prowess. He pushed back the French until his career ended in the least legendary way possible. In 1199, during a petty little siege in Limousin, Richard was inspecting the walls when some random crossbowman popped him with a bolt. Infection set in, and the Lionheart got outplayed by, well, a castle defender with good aim. Honestly, Shakespeare couldn't have scripted a more iconic death. On his deathbed, Richard supposedly forgave the crossbowman who shot him. Noble, right? Except after Richard died, his men flayed the poor guy alive anyway. So much for mercy. So, yeah, Richard the Lionheart, an absolute beast on the battlefield, a brilliant general, and a legend in war stories. But as a king, let's just say he left ruling England to everyone else while he collected victories. I guess if bravery on the battlefield could pay the bills, maybe he'd have been perfect.